Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. Welcome to the second episode of the Flying with Phoenix speaker series hosted by LTF Ventures, which is the only student-run VC fund at the University of Chicago. And today we have our guest, John Lindfors, who is the managing partner of DST Global, to join us for this event in the next 15 minutes. So welcome, John.
Thank you. Thank you. Great to be here with you. Thanks for the initiative and reaching out.
Thank you. It's our honor. So just a quick introduction of John's background before we get into all the wonderful questions that the audience have submitted beforehand, and we'll make sure that we can touch upon as many of those questions as possible in this event. So John is the managing partner of DST Investment Management, which is an investment advisor of DST Global Fund. Over the last several years, DST Global has invested in companies such as Facebook, Airbnb, Alibaba, JD.com, Spotify, Kuaishou, Robinhood, Meituan, DoorDash, just to name a few, and with an AUM in excess of $25 billion US. John joined DST in 2010 and has been based in Hong Kong ever since 2011. Prior to joining DST, John was a partner in charge of the European Technology and Media Investment Banking Department for Goldman Sachs. He joined Goldman Sachs in 1993 from the Swedish School of Economics and worked in London and New York during his 17 years tenure at the firm. Again, welcome, John.
Thank you. Thanks, David.
So I would like to start also by congratulating you again for appearing on for the third time on the Forbes Midas list of the world's top tech investors this year. That was released a month ago. So our last speaker for the event, Anna, was actually also, the third time on that list. She entered the same year as you in 2019 and stayed there for the last 3 years. And I know that you personally know Anna. So is there some kind of competition going on there between you and her? Are you seeing who's going to stay longer on that list?
No, not at all. Of course not. I think that what you've seen on the Forbes Midas list, which, if I'm correct, has basically been published for the last 25 years, really, since the dot-com boom in the late 90s. I think that what you've seen in the last 10 years is a dramatic internationalization of that list. So obviously a lot of Chinese VCs, Indian venture capitalists, many more European venture capitalists. So as the whole sort of tech and especially internet focused VC industry has evolved from having very much been Silicon Valley sort of led in the late 90s and then into the 2000s and perhaps early 2010s. Now obviously you have huge companies being formed in all over the world, but in particular in China. And as a result, investors who've been there over the last 10 to 15 years have ended up generating very significant gains for their investors. So I think there's just it's a result of a very natural evolution, but absolutely no competition with Anna. We're very good friends. And what she does with her fund is obviously focusing on much earlier stage opportunities, whereas we are sort of more growth equity focused.
Exactly. That's I guess a good summary of the difference between what you do and what Anna does, early stage versus late stage. But we'll get into the details of those later. Yeah. We touch upon the trend on VC and also DST's work in the past. But before we do all of that, I just want to take a big dive back into the history of John, of now a VC investor in China, who's actually from Finland, for those people who doesn't know in our call. So John graduated from Swedish School of Economics in 1993 and went to London to work for Goldman Sachs as an investment banker, right? So John, what made you want to go into investment banking at that point after your graduation? And did you, in your mind have a sense that maybe one day I'm going to go into VC eventually, so maybe Goldman Sachs is a good starting point? How does that reasoning work back in the day?
So it's actually, I think that it's worthwhile to keep in mind that obviously 28 years ago, when I graduated, the world was a very different place. First of all, I would say that the VC industry was a tiny cottage industry. which really existed sort of in its own bubble in Silicon Valley, but was certainly not, I would say, in the broader consciousness of, people in finance. People who were interested in finance investment, they headed to Wall Street, to London, perhaps Hong Kong, Tokyo, but no one was really sort of thinking about VC, at least at the time. So it was very much sort of its own tiny ecosystem. Then I would also say that when I came, when I sort of graduated, and I actually studied economics, sort of with a focus on finance. So very similar to what a lot of UChicago students are studying,
Exactly.
which, by the way, I think is a great background for any business-related activities. I think that it should almost be compulsory for all citizens, at least to have, a basic grounding. But sort of jokes aside, I would say that at the time, even the private equity industry, both in the US and Europe, was tiny. Hedge fund industry was pretty small, but probably the most developed one of those three. So, when I graduated there, if you wanted to go into something which at least I thought was exciting, I think that it was basically the choice of investment banking and perhaps consulting. Those were probably sort of the most sought after areas. And to be honest, I didn't have much of an understanding of investment banking at the time. By the way, information gathering back then was much more difficult because
Right.
it was very difficult to actually access information and the web. But I probably sort of in my mind, I had met enough people that it sounded exciting. But I think that what I didn't realize at the time was that I joined the investment banking industry when it was going to undergo massive growth over a 15-year period. And I can give you and I think that driven by a lot of different things: deregulation of European markets, emerging of global M&A, emerging of sort of much more global trading opportunities, so I think that it was actually, in hindsight, a very, very interesting time to join. And I'll just mention one fact. I think that when I joined Goldman Sachs in 1993, they had around 5,000 employees. And when I left in 2010, they had around 35,000 employees. So, the number of employees grew by 7 times, or perhaps six or 7 times, roughly that growth in the space of 17 years. So if you think about it, if you grow, I think if you join any industry and the industry grows by a factor of 6 to 7 times, you're just going to have a lot of opportunities and a lot of interesting things. Now, interestingly, I think that since then, if you look at just investment banking headcount of the big firms, I think that it has largely stayed flat since that time. Since 2010, it's largely stayed flat. Perhaps actually in some cases they restructured their activities and they have fewer employees. So I was very lucky in getting into investment banking when it was very much a growth industry. And then I was also lucky in joining Yuri and my other partners at DST 10 years ago, when sort of the growth equity industry was about to grow significantly. So I think that that's sort of certainly luck in hindsight. I don't think that it had too much to do with foresight. But I think that the interesting thing, I think, is always joining growth industries, because there are just so many more opportunities. And the other thing, for young students who are sort of thinking about where to go, I don't know if you are familiar with the NHL, the National Hockey League, and the all-time great ice hockey player Wayne Gretzky, who said that you should always skate to where the puck is going to be, not where it is today. And coming from Finland and having played a lot of ice hockey in my youth, perhaps that was something that I was thinking of, that better to sort of think about, well, what could be interesting 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and sort of position yourself for that ahead of time, rather than sort of going after the most recent trend.
No, I couldn't agree more, even though I didn't get that ice hockey analogy, but I get the message 100%. So you spent 17 years at Goldman, right? That's a long journey.
Yes.
A lot of time, people spend a couple of years and they move on. but you stayed there and you moved up the ranks, right? From analyst and all the way to eventually being in charge of the bank's European, TMT sector,
Yeah.
investment banking department. On that journey, that 17 years, did you have any mentors that guided you? And what are the biggest takeaway for your career as a banker?
So I think that I had a lot of mentors over the years, and I don't think that I would have stayed for 17 years with one employer if I didn't feel that it was a very, very interesting environment, very interesting job opportunities, and great people. Of course, I would say that Goldman Sachs is one of the great employers in the world, in terms of the opportunities that they provide to people. And I had a number of great guys. And I'll just name a few. One is Scott Kapnick, who's the founder of HPS Partners, one of the biggest sort of loan funds in the world, 60-70 billion AUM, based in New York. Another one was Greg Lemkow, who used to run investment banking most recently, but recently joined Michael Dell's family investment office, and a number of others. John Winkelried, who's now co-president of TPG. There were a lot of these over the years, and I think that without the support and sort of and challenges that I got from some of these guys, I wouldn't have stayed. And I was very, very happy with my time at Goldman Sachs. And I think that the holy grail for a lot of people who end up staying there for beyond perhaps the first analyst years and the first associate years is that, of course, you want to become a partner of the firm. But if you think about 35,000 people when I left the firm, or actually when I was elected partner in 2008, I think that there were around 35,000 people already at that time. It was just before the financial crisis, and we had 400 partners. So obviously it's a pretty select group.
Yeah.
But I think that was certainly from perhaps not in the first few years because everything is so new. But I think that if you stay there for a while, I think that obviously becomes your ambition. And I'm very grateful for having had the opportunity to become partner. I feel a little bit remorseful in hindsight for then having left the partnership 18 months later, which is quite unusual. But I think that I left on the best possible terms with a lot of my friends, keeping all of my friendships at the place. But I thought that it was just such an interesting opportunity to go into growth equity, to focus on sort of category leaders in the internet space. And given that I had in my last 10 years at Goldman Sachs always been focused on technology one way or another, and having advised and actually being participated in many investments in the first generation of internet companies back in 1998, 99, 2000, and then having seen sort of the dot-com crash, I was fascinated by it, by the technology sector. And for me, I never had any interest in going into any other sector. And I thought that, look, it's as the world digitizes and people just lead more and more digital lives, and as consumers spend goes online, I thought that there must be terrific opportunities there if you're patient enough. Now, markets go up and down and it can be very volatile, but I think that it's worthwhile to sort of have some stick with your convictions. Obviously you hope that they're right, but sort of stick with your convictions, long-term convictions, and not let the day-to-day noise impact your thinking from a career perspective too much.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. So beside that conviction you held, I guess, in the TMT sector and tech throughout the years, are there any particular skills or practices that you think you learned as an iBanker that becomes important or critical to your success as a VC investor?
Well, I think that what you definitely learn, and by the way, I wouldn't say that this is exclusively, something that you learn only in investment banking. I think that you learn it, in consulting companies and obviously many other corporate environments, etc. But I think that what it basically taught me was analytical thinking, and I think that what it also taught me is that I think that I'm sort of by nature quite interested in how things work. And I think that in order to be good in that job, you have to be curious to sort of understand things, understand companies, understand their problems. If you want to advise companies and executives and entrepreneurs on their problems, I think that you have to have some innate curiosity in order to understand their situation and then to help them. And then I think that what you definitely learn in that business as well is hard work and the gains that you can get from working hard. I think that there's no substitute, especially when you're young and perhaps don't have as many family obligations, etc., to really sort of immerse yourself in your job. I thought that it was a ton of fun, and now you have every once in a while. I think that every second year there are stories about people being overworked in banking, but the fact of the matter is that as a young 20-year-old, you're fresh out of college. It's a very exciting environment, and I didn't mind working long hours, but because I felt that I learned so much. And I think that if you learn a lot, if you're curious and you learn a lot, then you get satisfaction from learning new things, then that can be the right place for you. And then I would sort of say I don't think that there are sort of, I wouldn't say that there are sort of necessarily critical skills that you would learn in investment banking that can then be applicable to venture investing. I think the fact of the matter is that the big, perhaps if you compare a few different ways of analyzing companies, I think that if you are working for a buyout fund, and buyout fund, you focus on cash flows. Very often you lever up the business when you buy it, versus growth investing versus VC is that you can do a ton of analysis on a pretty stable industry, stable business in sort of LBO land. In growth equity land, it's much more, first of all, you very seldom use any leverage, right, or very little if you do it. And then it's all about, well, how can this company grow? Is it going to, how can I sort of get conviction that it's going to grow by 2 times or 3 times or 10 times or 50 times in the next 5 years? So it's you sort of really try to figure out what is the real addressable market? What are today's numbers telling me? How could this develop? And then I think that on the other extreme, venture capital investing, very often, and I think that Anna probably touched on this, you back founders prior to them having launched any product. You support them, based on a PowerPoint that they have. Yes. And then it's very much based on sort of your gut feel about the sort of the founder in question. So I think that there's sort of a continuum of different investing styles in the private domain. And I think that iBanking is probably the direct skills that you learn, especially as a junior banker, are obviously most directly applicable to sort of buyout type of investments. And that's why I would actually personally, if I had to give advice to a young UChicago student, who's interested in getting into venture capital investing, I would definitely sort of get other skills first, just get other experiences. And it could be in a corporate environment, it could be in investment banking, it could be in consulting, but I would definitely like to get more work experience before jumping into VC investing, because it's so focused on understanding people, understanding their motivations. And if you have a little bit more experience, I think that makes it easier.
Yeah, and I think that one point that many people would mention, for advising maybe not going to VC right out of college, is that the training you receive, right, might not be as structured or comprehensive as you would in maybe some other industry like investment banking that you chose, or consulting that many people chose. Do you echo with that sentiment? Is that maybe the training more structured elsewhere?
Yeah, I would agree, but there are loads of other things that you can do as well. I wouldn't sort of see banking and consulting being the only paths. I know a lot of very successful VCs who ended up starting as engineers in a company, or ended up starting in marketing for startups. So obviously there are a lot of startups now, exciting startups that you can join, get experience from, probably work at least as hard in terms of hours, and get great experience. That opportunity wasn't quite there, when I started. The startup ecosystem just wasn't nearly, not even a fraction as big and as exciting as it is today on a global basis. Finally, perhaps fourth thing that one could consider, and obviously UChicago students are some of the most sought after globally when you come out, is also just interesting corporate jobs, significant, obviously the best run companies in the world, Fortune 500 companies, without fail, they would be, or perhaps not without fail, but a large percentage of them would be very well run with sort of great trainee programs. So I think that there are lots of different ways to get into venture capital investing, if that's what you want. And then I would perhaps finally say that, remember, life is long. You don't, when you're 23, 22, 23, and you get out of college, that's not something that you may necessarily sort of think of. It's all about, I have to do things right now, and I can't be patient. But the fact of the matter is that, if you like your job, you're going to be working for 40 years, 50 years. Look at, Warren Buffett and Munger, 90 and 96, I believe. So if you find something that you are really interested in, and especially when it comes to investing, you can do it for a very, very long period of time. And that's why I would actually encourage people to sort of think very broadly about opportunity sets. And, just because you've had, in this case, Anna and me, get into this industry through banking originally, I don't think that that's necessarily the best way to get into it today. There are many different avenues.
That is absolutely true. Thank you so much for that valuable advice to the audience, many of whom are thinking about going to VC. So this is I think a good segue to go into, I guess, DST and the investment that you made in the past, the strategies. So one of our audience, Wesley, is actually curious, what is different about DST's investment strategy or value proposition that has allowed it, to partner with really the best companies in Asia. You invested in, Alibaba, Xiaomi, all of those big name companies. How did you, partner with them, and what made you the preferred choice over all the other, VC fund that those companies could potentially partner with?
So I think that's a very interesting question. We obviously debate it all the time. I would say perhaps a few things. First of all, I think that right from the time when we were set up 12 years ago or so, I think that we were very focused on founders and sort of understanding the founder's mentality, drive, his vision for what he wanted to do, obviously execution, track record, etc. So we have always been very, very founder focused. And what we also realized is that, the smartest founders are very often curious people. Mm-hmm. They want to understand different things. And in our mind, rather than us telling them, what they should be thinking about, we noticed that many of our founders got a lot out of talking, to each other. So I think that, being a founder is actually quite a lonely job. You're at the top of the pyramid. You've sort of set the business up. You have to have a lot of drive. Very often you need to upgrade your team. So people who were there in the beginning, you have to fire, and you have to hire new people, or perhaps you don't even need to fire them, but they're just not going to have the same career progression as you hire more people in. And there are very few people who have experience to directly advise founders as a result. So, but what we noticed was that they very much sort of like to talk to each other, because even if you are in very different industries, at the end of the day, you have very similar experiences. So I would say, number one, focus on founders. Number two, network and sort of network of founders. And in our funds, we've probably backed 80 founding teams. And obviously, in the majority of these cases, we're talking about co-founders rather than just one single founder. And we've noticed that they can actually get a lot out of this sort of network. So we're very, very focused on nurturing that founder network. And even if we might have exited a company many years ago, we still keep in touch with the founder and try to help them. And that has happened repeatedly, that we continue to be very active business partners, although we may not be investors anymore. And then thirdly, so if you have founders network, third point would be a global perspective. We have found it immensely helpful to have had the opportunity to invest in leading companies in the Bay Area,
Right.
in other parts of the US, in Europe, in China, of course, in India, more recently in Indonesia, Brazil, other parts of Latin America, even Africa recently. So having that global perspective, in our opinion, helps a lot. So if you look at one particular fintech company or payments company, for example, see something working in the US, then you sort of scour the world for other companies that do similar things, same things or similar things. And I think that that's, for example, how we have found many interesting companies. You know, you don't necessarily need to be the first one to invest, you know, in a company. You know, there are different opportunities to sort of ride that wave of innovation. And then fourthly, I would say team. We've had a very low turnover in the team. We have a small team. We only have 20 investment professionals globally. But I think that, you know, cohesive team, and I would say a very sort of analytically honest and transparent discussion, and sort of realizing that we all do mistakes all the time. Certainly I do a lot, but I think that if you sort of constantly try to improve your decision making, try to improve your analysis, perhaps you learn something from your mistakes. You know, that's sort of the hope and wish that we have. So by working hard and making mistakes, perhaps you make slightly better decisions next time around. So I would say that those four things have sort of helped us build a brand, and that's probably the fifth aspect to it. If you think about it, when companies go out to the market and raise, especially for growth companies, they're quite focused on brand. Because, you know, if you have let's say that you have a great early stage fund in, you know, let's say that Anna and her team have invested, and then you might have, you know, another sort of great VC focusing on, for example, A and B rounds, and sort of building a cap table with brand names has a lot of benefits. First of all, it's typically makes it easier to raise the next round, because people are like, hey, well, if these guys invested in this, there must be something to it. It also allows you to perhaps recruit high caliber people, because they're like, well, you know, if I have the choice of, you know, two companies that I can join, but this one has, you know, a number of blue chip investors, you know, the likelihood is higher that you would go for the company with the blue chip investors. So I think that brand, and perhaps, and by the way, the brand probably plays has a lesser impact in sort of the more traditional buyout stage, but I think that it has a big impact in growth stage and venture capital stage.
Okay, I think it's super interesting that you mentioned your focus on founders, right? Because that's what most people would relate to: early stage founder, angel fund, like the one that Anna ran. Like, you really have to look at the founders and their PowerPoint and their idea and their vision, and you have to make a decision right there. But for you, when you entered some of those larger companies, they're already very established. They are a track record of growth, and you still pay a lot of attention to the founders, which is pretty great. But there is like this, you know, question that recently arose because, you know, of media and because of social media in particular. People get really hyped up about certain founder, like the celebrity founders, for example, you know, the WeWork founders that people, you know, they invest in him. They think that he's going on the right direction, but eventually turns out to be a huge bubble. How do you avoid that kind of, I guess, fad investing in maybe this guy who everybody believes is going to make the best company in this industry, without paying overvalued sum of money into that firm? How do you balance that?
So that's a great question. So I would say a few things. I think that it's sort of inevitable in many cases when you have successful companies that grow and grow and grow, and I think especially in the consumer internet space, because they reach in many cases hundreds of millions, if not billions, of consumers. So everyone feels that they have a relationship with, let's say, Instagram or Facebook and WhatsApp, and you know, those are all sort of Facebook apps. everyone feels that they have a relationship, and then I think that it's inevitable that there's a huge amount of focus on the founder and on the CEO, and typically when he or she owns a very significant percentage of the company and figure on all kinds of Forbes lists, etc. So I think that it's sort of inevitable. I think that we try to stay very much focused on really the founder's abilities as a business leader, rather than getting carried away perhaps with sort of the halo effect that comes over time.
The fame and the highlight and the media coverage.
Exactly. So I think that we sort of try to, and the fact of the matter is that vast majority of these founders are super smart, extremely driven by the mission for the company, and they have great clarity of thinking where they want to take it. And it's fabulous to be able to have those discussions with them. Very, very interesting. I think that we learn, a huge amount from them. But then I would also say that given that we are in the growth stage, we also have the benefit of not just sort of it's not just a bet on I think that it's a huge bet on founders still, but it's not sort of the only thing that you take into consideration, because obviously in the growth stage, so the definition of it is that you actually have a business that is, normally generating revenues, in some cases positive cash flow, in some cases even profits, and you sort of have some data to go
Yep.
by. But the fact of the matter is that in many cases we've sort of seen over the years that data today is only one thing. Even if you have a lot of data and you can analyze cohorts and unit economics and whatnot, it's still a big bet on a founder trying to navigate his or her way in a very challenging business environment.
Yeah, that makes total sense to me. And there's another point you mentioned in your, I guess, defining traits of DST is that the global perspective, right? You have investment teams all over the world in the major market, in US, in emerging market like China and other places. So what factors do you consider when you're investing in a Chinese startup versus a US startup? Is there any difference in the logic of investment when you are investing in a developed market and developing market? Let's say if it's Uber compared to Didi, like, do you value them differently in terms of their potential?
So I think that on one sort of super high level, at the end of the day, it's the same. Basically the three things that we are very focused on is what is the real addressable market. That's obviously why US companies and Chinese companies are so interesting, because very often the addressable market that they go after just in their domestic areas is so big. US GDP of 22 trillion, China GDP of, call it 15 trillion. If you then look at individual European countries, I think Germany has GDP of perhaps 5 trillion. So the fact of the matter is that we look for, that's why we've ended up investing quite actively in the US and China, just because of the markets are there and the addressable market for these companies are significant. Secondly, we obviously, as we've talked a lot about founders, we're focused on the founder, and then we're focused on metrics. And I think that those three areas that we sort of try to analyze and understand are the same no matter where we invest in the world. Then I would say that there are obviously a lot of differences then in the market. Very different ecosystems, very different players. But in many cases, I would say that the similarities are more than the differences. If you look at what an amazingly successful business, for example, Didi has built in ride-hailing in China, and you look at Uber, who's done the same in the US and in other parts of the world, I think that there are many things that are very similar when you compare those two companies. Of course, there are differences, but there are a lot more similarities. And I think that it's actually understanding those similarities and sometimes differences, which hopefully over time give an edge to us. So I would say, to summarize, at the end of the day, it's sort of similar value drivers, then when you go sort of on a micro level, there are obviously a myriad of details which are very different on a case-by-case basis.
That is definitely true. So I guess let's just talk a little more about the track record you had in the past 11 years now in the VC industry, right? There's been massive change in the past 10, 15 years in the internet sector, in China especially. How accurate was some of your predictions, right? Did you make the right bet? What's the win rate in the bet that you've made so far in the Chinese market?
So I would say that we have been very lucky in many cases in getting involved in some of the great companies early on in China, in companies like Alibaba and JD more than 10 years ago, Didi back in 2014, Meituan in 2015, Kuaishou in 2015, and many others. So I think that we were lucky in being there relatively early, building a little bit of a brand name and a network, and then it's easier to actually get into different opportunities. So I think that we by working hard, meeting a lot of people, and sort of trying to really understand key themes and sort of changes, transformative changes taking place, we've been able to sort of make some bets that turned out to be pretty good. And of course, in our business, you don't have to have a 100% success rate. Some things go wrong. That's inevitable. Or sort of, let's say that we don't have to say that they go wrong, but they don't necessarily meet our original expectations. But then some things can, and some things have actually turned out to be much more attractive from a returns perspective than we originally expected. Now, if you sort of take a step back and think about what are some of the projections, industry projections that we made 8 to 10 years ago, what turned out to happen, what turned out to be a fact. I think that if you sort of generalize, I think that we were actually conservative on many of those expectations. So for example, online ad spend in 2020 was probably something like $350 billion. And online ad spend is important because if you think about a lot of the business models, they're really driven by ad spend. 350 billion. I remember that when we forecast this for one of our big investors 8 years ago, we were expecting 200 billion by 2020. If you look at things like internet market cap, we predicted 3 trillion of internet market cap 8 years ago for 2020. It turned out to be 8 trillion. So the market has grown a lot faster and become a lot bigger than we expected. Now, by the way, given the downdraft in stocks in the last few months, perhaps it's down to 6 trillion now. Who knows? But I would say that generally speaking, I think that we were taken by surprise by the significant sort of growth in the underlying market. And if you sort of think about our core sector, consumer internet, which includes everything from social media to e-commerce to different O2O businesses, offline to online, like ride hailing, grocery delivery, food delivery, fintech, etc. I think that there's going to be a lot of opportunities over the next 20 years. We've seen this massive online migration over the last 12 months as a result of COVID, which really accelerated a number of trends in a very meaningful way. And I think that that's going to continue, perhaps not at quite the same pace as we saw in the last 12 months, but I think that that's going to continue. The fact that you can offer services for free in a very convenient way, where many of the market leaders end up enjoying significant economies of scale and network effects, just lends itself to the formation of big and interesting companies. And then I would also say that the fact of the matter is that there are always smart entrepreneurs that want to go and change the universe, and today's leader will inevitably be challenged. And I have to tell you an interesting case. Just in China e-commerce, we had the we had the great fortune of having had the opportunity to back both JD and Alibaba more than 10 years ago.
Right.
We thought that the online e-commerce sector in China was largely, a fight between these two big companies. With, if you look at sort of total e-commerce spend, probably 25% being spent on JD, 75% on Alibaba. If you look at sort of order of magnitude, if you look at the situation back in 2016, and then you have, a startup using a few interesting tweaks, including marketing super successfully on Tencent's WeChat platform, and you build a company called Pinduoduo.
Yes.
Very amazing founder, Colin, who basically built this company from absolutely nothing to become a company worth more than 200 billion, and taking a significant chunk of the e-commerce market. And by the way, rapidly expanding the whole e-commerce market. So taking a share of the market by essentially expanding it, and especially going into lower tier cities, providing, a very, very affordable and easily accessible opportunity for consumers to buy stuff online. So I think that's why I think that, if it can happen in an extremely competitive Chinese e-commerce market, that you have a third player emerge all of a sudden, just by a few interesting business model innovations, then it can happen anywhere. And if you think about another trend, which I think is also fascinating, if you look at all of the big social media players from, globally, from, Facebook to Snap to, loads of different players. And then you have a couple of Chinese companies like ByteDance with Douyin in China and TikTok outside of China and Kuaishou in China, basically launched this short video phenomenon, right, which is now being super actively pursued as an e-commerce channel as well. So I think that things are always changing, and I think that that's what makes it so interesting, that even if you sort of try to do a ton of analysis trying to figure it out, new founders will constantly take you by surprise, and their ingenuity is unstoppable, and so is their energy. And that's why I think that, today's behemoths, they look like complete behemoths, but I think that they will be disrupted in various ways going forward.
Absolutely.
Which provides opportunities for us, which provides opportunities for early stage investors, growth investors, and then subsequently public investors over time.
Everybody in the market, basically.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's interesting that you're almost implying that, I guess, in the next 5-10 years, a lot of the trend will be set in the emerging market, the Chinese market. Like, the short video sharing phenomenon started here in the Chinese market, and then became a phenomenon with TikTok in the US and elsewhere. Do you think, maybe more specifically, what sectors do you think will be the trend of which will be set here in China, and what sectors will still be set in, let's say, more developed market in the US or Europe in the next 5 years?
It's a very difficult question to answer because it's so unclear. But I think that what allows significant companies to emerge is when you have changes in some of the underlying technologies. So I think that 4G in China, which was essentially launched at scale sort of in 2014-15, that's really what allowed short video to thrive. So right, without 4G, it wouldn't have happened. Now we have 5G being launched. Bandwidth is going to grow by an order of magnitude, let's say from 50 megabytes to 500 or perhaps 2 or 3 gigas in the not too distant future. So that just enables a lot of sort of services to be rethought and reconfigured. I also think that what is at the heart of many of these changes is also AI, new algorithms that can be used on massive data sets. And I think that the futures, the sort of the successful companies in the future are no doubt going to be the companies that can use use AI and sort of develop algorithms a little bit more effectively, and that can then apply it on a very, very significant data sets, which in turn obviously then becomes sort of a virtuous cycle. So I think that you will continue to have Chinese companies emerge and go outside of China. It has been the prerogative mostly of US companies in the last 10 years or in the last 20 years to become the global behemoths. But I think that you will find a few European companies, Spotify being a good example, someone who came in and sort of completely changed the music streaming business. You wouldn't have thought that would come out of Stockholm, Sweden. So I think that that's the exciting thing, that, the next big thing that might take over the world in the next 10 years, perhaps someone is developing it right now in Lagos, Nigeria, or some other place. You don't have to be in Silicon Valley. You don't necessarily have to be in Beijing.
Absolutely, absolutely. So the last couple of questions I want to touch upon is about, career advancement. Things people here are mostly just aspiring young students. I guess the first question is, where should someone start learning about VC in China or Asia in general, if they're currently based in the US or the West in general? Like, put yourself back in the shoes of, someone who just, moved from London to Hong Kong, or who wants to make that move but not sure yet. What should they do to learn about this growing market?
Yeah, so I think that it's first of all, I think that I would just be very, very focused on trying to read up on different things. Obviously there are so many online sources. I would also make sure that I'm on, that I would get immediately pinged. You can obviously sign up to different services to understand, venture capital firms make new investments, follow what they're doing. And then also, try to meet some of these venture capitalists. It's not easy because these people are super busy, but I would definitely sort of apply for summer jobs, for internships, etc. But I would sort of just be very focused, because there's so much information out there. I would just sort of follow very closely what people are doing in the sector. That's already going to give you a leg up. Just sort of putting in the work to satisfy your curiosity in that regard.
Yeah, it feels like many of the people who are attending this call already have that leg up, because they are speaking to a venture capitalist in the field.
Absolutely.
Work. So
absolutely.
The last question that I gotta ask, just on behalf of student body, is, what skills and qualities does DST look for when they recruit new members? Have you ever poached anyone straight out of undergrad? Do they have to wait a few years, maybe some other jobs, and then have a good chance at DST Global?
So I would say that, for us specifically, we would always hire experience or people with, I would say, 4 to 5 years of experience.
Okay.
And they can have experience from all kinds of different things. We have people who've been research analysts. We have people who've obviously been investment bankers, been consultants, worked for companies sort of in the industry, corporates in the industry. So I think that you can come into this sector from a number of different angles. So I wouldn't be too worried about that. But I would say that if you want to get into investing, I would definitely sort of try to think about sort of different internships, summer jobs, etc. There's no sort of standard way how to get into this industry or to get into our firm. So I think that we try to keep an open mind, and then I think that it's a massive advantage outside of the US to speak other languages and be curious in other cultures. You're never going to be a polyglot and speak every single language in the world, but if you have a few other languages that you can sort of show that you can understand cultures, understand founders in a particular area, I think that certainly helps. And then I think that it goes without saying that UChicago students are hardworking, ambitious, intelligent, curious. So I think that you already tick a lot of boxes for the most demanding employers in the world.
Well, thank you so much for those encouraging words for our young students and aspiring professionals in this chat, and those who are listening. But thank you so much for joining us today for this second episode of Flying with Phoenix. And as a Phoenix yourself, thank you so much for teaching the younger birds in the crowd, how they can fly and launch their career into investment and VC and startup and all those very, very interesting fields. And I would like to let everybody know that if you have a startup idea at University of Chicago, always feel free to reach out to myself and LTF Ventures to apply for funding. And if you happen to found a startup that eventually end up to growing rapidly in Asia or elsewhere in the world, you can also go to John and apply for funding for DST Global. Thank you everybody for coming. And I'd like to thank you again, John, for joining us for the second episode of the speaker series. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Thank you and have a good weekend. Take care.
Have a good weekend. I'll see you,
Bye-bye.
John.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
See ya. Bye.